and finally through the Illuminati. All of these things really are simply secret organizations which pretend not to have any leanings towards anything, but all roads lead eventually. And so this situation arose where a network existed to create a wonder image using the talents of many, many composers. And this required decades. And that's why the Mozart catalogue finally doesn't arrive until the 1850s, 60 years after his death. A lot of industry, a lot of falsification, a big story, you know.
Absolutely. So, and what would you say? I mean, we understand this now, that the situation in Austria wasn't that great at that time. They needed something to kind of prop themselves up and so forth. But if we look at it from an even maybe larger context, what do you think at this point was the, more maybe perhaps than motives for this or purpose for creating this image? Or are we talking about music as manipulation as well, perhaps? Or I don't know if you want to go into that area.
Yes, music was always propaganda. Music was used as propaganda by the Jesuits even before 1773. They were the pioneers of theatre. This was a form of proselytizing the country. In 1731, in Salzburg, 30,000, this is remarkable, 30,000 inhabitants of Salzburg were kicked out of the city or kicked out of the principality. Why? Because they weren't Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. This was in 1731, 20 years before Mozart's death. Talk about intolerance. This was in the middle of winter, and this was not in the 15th century or 16th. This is in the 18th century, 1731.
And do you know what happened? Did they freeze to death, or did they just escape? And these were Protestants, or what was the
Jesuits with their Counter-Reformation. Of course, they hated Luther. They hated the Protestant Reformation. The Jesuits were determined to fight a Counter-Reformation, to re-evangelize in the name of the Catholic Church, and they finally arrived in Salzburg in 1731, 20 years before Mozart, or 25 years before Mozart's birth. And they were amazed to find that huge numbers of the population were not signing up to their program. And this enraged the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, so he gave them 8 days to leave the city. You can check it out for yourself. It's well-known fact of German Austrian history. And they went to different countries, and they were traveling for several years and finally found different places to stay.
So just just clarify for us again and our listeners here. Mozart, does he have a connection then with the Jesuits, or is this a Protestant revolutionary agenda that is behind the propping up of Mozart?
The Jesuit order went underground from 1773 onwards.
Right.
So therefore, you won't find direct reference of the Jesuits helping Mozart. You will not find that after 1773. But you will find his association with the fraternities. And that's why he becomes a Freemason. That's why he has many friends who are Illuminati. If you were to check his patrons and his friends, it's amazing how many of them are involved in Illuminatist activity. The fraternity. The difference, really, to put an ethical point on it, is this: that Christianity is an open religion. It was not done in a corner. It was not hidden. It was public. It was outright. It was straightforward. But the fraternities made everything a secret religion, a mystical religion, revealed only in degrees. You see, the attraction of this. Plus, of course, there was the attraction of the new knowledge of the Renaissance. The Renaissance brought, literally, the Renaissance was the rebirth of pagan philosophy. Also mathematics, of course, but pagan philosophy was very tempting, and many people, even non-Catholics, were seduced into believing that being a member of the Rosicrucians or a member of the Freemasons was not such a bad thing. It was enlightening people, and it was helping. They didn't realize, of course, that this was just a vessel a way in which the population could be eventually manipulated and brought back under control, so that the reforms of Joseph II in Austria on his death were reversed within 4 or 5 years of his death. All the reforms, all the religious toleration was finished.
Mm-hmm.
The great reforming emperor Joseph II, he spent his entire life trying to reform what was really unreformable.
Very interesting. And how about the music then in that regard? Do you enjoy the music still to listen to it, or
Yeah,
you do?
absolutely.
Mm.
So I would go. I still say that some of this music is some of the greatest of all. But the cost is tremendous. It's the suppression of wonderful works, wonderful musical work. Have you heard of a composer named Cartellieri?
No.
Well, Cartellieri is a great composer who helped in the creation of Mozart's career and also even early Beethoven. Cartellieri died very young, but some of his music is absolutely wonderful and suppressed.
Mm.
Only recently have a few recordings been made of Cartellieri's music, Van Hal's music. This is the cost of building an icon, a massive icon such as Mozart. And it was perpetuated, if you look at the early history of the London Philharmonic Orchestra, 1813, the first year's concerts were dominated by, inverted commas, Mozart. Dominated by Mozart,
Mm-hmm.
because that orchestra was created by the fraternities. I
just want to interject there. Do you think that this also could be then about control in one sense, that they wanted to control or quiet the opposition if many people or too many composers are in there,
Absolutely. It's like an agency. You have an agency of 20 people, but it's so much easier. Life is so much easier if you just focus on 1 or 2 people and make them into idols.
Yeah.
And that's how they did it. Mozart just happened to be the selected candidate for that job. Everyone else would be forgotten, but they wouldn't forget the great icon that is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. They would because it would be wall to wall Mozart,
Yes, but this was also, I guess, in this period. I mean, the common man, so to speak, didn't have the money to go to a concert, right? This was for the royalty, the nobility, and things like this. Maybe people who at that time got involved in politics or whatever, right?
Exactly. Well, this is the whole point, is that when the French Revolution came, and here's the twist in the story, people knew that society couldn't continue much longer. But the conservatives, that is to say the elites, had their own system of trying to survive. And one of them was to create the wunderkind, Mozart. You can't destroy this society. Look what we've created. Look how marvelous this. So this was part of their thinking, that the survival of the state would be okay because we have these wonderful geniuses. And what better way than to cover yourself with the culture, the cultural achievements of Austria and Germany. Who could question this? And so the Marriage of Figaro, which anticipates the French Revolution, seems to be an example of liberalism. Yeah, seems to be. It's exactly what it was intended to do, to perpetuate the power of these elites, who were the patrons, of course, of art in those days.
And so this is also about disseminating the Enlightenment philosophy, so to speak, to these people who had the money to attend the concerts or were invited or what have you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that is very interesting. And you mentioned the Marriage of Figaro. We can go in a little bit later. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about the Magic Flute, because that's the one that people have focused on as with the most kind of Freemasonic connotation, so to speak. So we can talk about that later on. But in regards to, are there any other plays or operas or concertos that you think conveys this message as well?
Of Freemason, or of symbolism you're speaking about?
Well, of Enlightenment, maybe the philosophy of the Revolutionary era, something like that.
Well, it's an interesting subject. If you look at the early opera Idomeneo, which is not a comic opera, it's an opera seria. It was written in Munich before Mozart came to Vienna, an early opera of Mozart, Idomeneo. The characters in this opera, if you analyze them closely enough, they're all representing real people, of which Mozart is only one. So there is a how would you say, a subliminal element to the Mozart operas. Another point is that the Mozart operas, as we know them, were constructed mostly after his lifetime. None of them were published in his lifetime. The orchestral score, I mean. This many years after his death before they were published. And if we can speak about the Marriage of Figaro at some point, I'll be very fascinating subject.
Absolutely. Let's get into that in the next segment. Sorry to cut you off. Please continue.
I was going to say that the score of the Marriage of Figaro, the one which was premiered in Vienna on the 1st of May, 1786, special day this for the Illuminati, by the way. The 1st of May, 1786 was the premiere of Le Nozze di Figaro. What they don't tell you in the biographies is the hissing and booing that came from the audience. It was so poorly written. And if you go back to the National Library of Austria in Vienna and look at the score itself, something that Mozartians don't really somehow seem to do. We got the first images of these, and we published them last year, and it's riddled with mistakes. This music is manipulated. It was much later that it was revived and reorchestrated in Prague by Mozart's Apollonian supporters, and finally published years after his death in a form which is very, very different from what was originally performed. So, this is a very interesting subject.
And you mentioned was it Museum of Vienna that you found these documents in?
Well, before the opera was premiered on the 1st of May, they obviously needed to rehearse it. And this document, the score, the orchestral and choral score, is today in the library in Vienna. And it's surprising, it's very surprising that, can you believe it, that in 200 years of Mozart study, nobody's actually studied it?
Really? And these are accessible? You've been there yourself, looked at them?
Yes, we made microfiches of the entire document. So they didn't like it. I mean, the museum didn't like it, but we did it, and we paid for it.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you is this something that you will have published in your upcoming book, Robert?
It's already been published in 2008, and we have these photographs, these images, etc. Now,
and where can, just before you continue, and where can people find that? Mention the book, or where can we go to look at it? Yeah,
how about if you could do a web search for Figaro, l'Aria della Contessa.
Oh, well, you have to spell that for me later on, and we can put up a link to that on the website.
Yes, you can read about the background history to this. But there was a second score made by Mozart himself, and it's this one which is on sale at the moment. You can buy a copy of Mozart's score of the Marriage of Figaro, and you think, wow, that's incredible. Look at that, it's wonderful. But that's not the score that was used in 1786. It was made later, and they don't tell you that. So this